Radio.
Some of the states have already legalized and it's working.
Providing a fresh perspective on the events shaping the cannabis industry. With your host, Deputy Chief of NORML,
Steve Vanderwall.
From business and politics to medicine and technology, and everything in between. This is NORML Radio.
What is up, everybody? It is Monday, June 24th, and this is our first live episode. My guest today needs absolutely no introduction. She is the founder of NORML. She is the executive director of NORML. She is the HBIC and my very good friend and sister, Mary Kruger.
Hello, Steve.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, man. What a this has been a bit of a frustrating week for us cannabis community, wouldn't you say?
It definitely has. It's been up and down, and we're still going.
Yeah. So as most people are well aware of, the MRTA died last week at the 11th hour. It was unexpected. I was 100% sure that this was going to pass. This was a bill that was objectively the best and most comprehensive piece of cannabis legislation to date. Would you agree? Yeah,
it really is the gold standard of cannabis legislation. And I think that we put a lot of faith into our leaders in Albany that they were going to come through and pass this bill through like Governor Cuomo had promised he was going to do. And it was definitely a huge disappointment last week when that didn't happen.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because this was a bill that would literally positively impact the lives of almost every New Yorker, whether or not you were a cannabis consumer or not.
Yep.
This touched agriculture. This touched justice, medicine,
education,
everything.
Law enforcement. It touched everything. I think the most disappointing thing was how much we listened to the opposition and how much we really took that feedback into consideration when drafting different versions of the bill, meaning that, we heard law enforcement and that they needed funding to go towards DREs or drug recognition experts to be able to train more law enforcement officers to be able to tell when someone is driving under the influence of marijuana, which folks are already doing. So it's already a problem in our community that's been identified, and the MRTA would have put funding to that. And now we don't have that funding, right? And it also would have put money towards education, specifically for youth and also for drug and alcohol treatment programs, things that are needed right now. And now we don't have that funding. We can't solve that problem that we've identified that exists.
I mean, literally, there was $1 million earmarked for DRE training. And I don't remember who said it was. That would train about 40 to 60 officers per year.
And it goes beyond just being able to tell if someone's driving under the influence of marijuana. It's any substance that is not alcohol, right? Because we only have a breathalyzer for alcohol. So this would also ripple out into the opioid epidemic and all the folks that we have driving on opiates right now, which is super dangerous. We know that's very dangerous, and we don't have the resources right now for law enforcement. So, it was definitely upsetting that this bill didn't pass through.
So let's talk about why it didn't pass, because at the end of the day, it seemed like we had the votes. We have a fully Democratic House. The governor, the Assembly, and the Senate were all democratically controlled. This was a hot topic. This was, they pushed through the green light bill, which to me was more controversial than the cannabis bill. And this was a well thought out piece of legislation. And at the 11th hour, it died.
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
There's a lot of reasons it happened, right? Let's go back to last May, I think, and when this issue in New York last April, actually, when it really started coming into the media and really serious talks started happening around legalization for adult use in New York and what that's going to look like. Refreshing everyone's memory, Cuomo has been adamantly opposed to legalizing marijuana for adult use up until about last April, when Cynthia Nixon was using it as one of her platforms to run on for governor. Within weeks after Cynthia Nixon coming out and using that as her platform, Governor Cuomo quickly changed his tune, sped along the process for the Department of Health study about the health impacts of legalization, then came out less than a month later, I think, and the Department of Health study was released saying it's in the best public health interest for New York State to legalize cannabis for adult use. Fast forward to Cuomo winning the election, and he is saying that he's going to legalize cannabis for adult use in his first 100 days. Also speaking on this platform of a social justice agenda. So talking about how, legalization needs to be done in a way that's going to impact those who've been most harmed from the war on drugs. And then we initially were trying to get legalization passed through with the budget this year because, as we know, legalization has a lot of money attached to it. And historically, if you are trying to pass a bill that significantly impacts like the fiscal money, that will commonly get passed through with the budget. So we tried to do that, and Governor Cuomo had introduced a new piece of legislation. It was the CRTA, the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act. And our sponsors of the MRTA were working with Governor Cuomo during the budget to try and negotiate the CRTA to get it to be more like the MRTA and things that were non-negotiable for us and our sponsors when we're looking to legalize. And to expand on that, there's really 3 pillars that New York State legalization must include. It's justice, equity, and reinvestment. And that encompasses a lot of things. And the CRTA was really lacking in that, where the MRTA was the gold standard in all 3 of those things. So yeah, it didn't pass through with the budget because it didn't have the support that it needed. And then after it didn't pass through with the budget, the MRTA focus was back on that. A new version of it was drafted that, like I said before, really took into consideration that feedback that we got from folks around the state, where more funding was needed for different areas. And we gave the funding to those places. And yeah, are we going to get into why it died now?
Yeah, I think we need to get it. Before we get into why it died, I think we have to go back to what you said about, Cuomo promised this on his first 100 days on a very social justice agenda, right? But this all came down to money, right? The CRTA, while he said focused on social justice measures, financially had no social justice measures.
Those were just words, right? I mean, those types of words need to be carried out through policy and actual action, and that's not what we saw in the CRTA. We saw an attempt. We did see, there were some good things that were in the CRTA that we actually took from it and adopted and put into the MRTA, most notably having money going towards incubator programs. So, we hear a lot about priority licensing when we're talking about equity and diversity in the industry, but it goes beyond getting that license, and you need support after you have that license to actually run a successful, compliant business. So we thought that was really great in the CRTA that funding was put towards that, and we took that and worked it into the MRTA. What we didn't like about the CRTA was that it took the tax revenue that came from this industry and put it into the general fund, which, for those of you who don't know what the general fund is, it's literally just this general fund of money that Governor Cuomo has a say over how it's spent. I believe the comptroller does as well, but it's not money that's allocated to go to anything specifically. We also knew another thing Governor Cuomo wanted to accomplish in his first 100 days was finding a way to fix the MTA, and that's the New York City subway system. And there were talks about money from the tax revenue from legalization going to fund the MTA. And our sponsors, Crystal People-Stokes and Liz Kruger, have been very adamant on the fact that money made from these taxes, some of it needs to be earmarked to go back into communities that have been most harmed and targeted from the war on drugs and be used for a community reinvestment grant fund, which is money that the communities would have a say in how it's spent, whether it goes to fixing sidewalks, if it goes to workforce development programs, GED programs, building playgrounds, anything that community feels like they need reinvestment back into, because the reality of it is those communities have been targeted and disproportionately impacted from the war on drugs. And when someone's arrested for a misdemeanor level, low level possession for weed, we're talking smoking a joint, having a dime bag, and you get a misdemeanor level prosecution for that. that has ripple effects out into your whole family and your whole community, right? You've now been taken out of having access to meaningful employment. You don't have access to financial aid for school. You don't have access to public assistance, public housing. If you have a CPS case open, it negatively impacts that. There's so many negative ripple effects that happen from someone having a small amount of marijuana. And those arrests and prosecutions have been really concentrated. So our sponsors are very bottom line that money also needs to be very concentrated.
But here's what I don't understand is we've been decriminalized since 1977, and yet there's been over 800,000 arrests that have happened, and the majority of them have been people of color. Why? How does this work?
So let's get there. Let's talk about why the MRTA died first, and then let's get to how we've had so many folks get arrested and where we are today after the MRTA dying. So I think that MRTA, going back to why it died, it had to deal with having a lack of support from our leaders coming from the time after the budget, after the CRTA didn't get passed through with the budget. So when the CRTA didn't get passed through with the budget, which is beginning of April, if we had Governor Cuomo at that point saying, okay, I'm behind the MRTA, let's get this bill passed through. Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Speaker Carl Heastie, what do we need to do to get all of the legislators to work together and get this bill passed? We would be in a much different place than we are right now, because Governor Cuomo didn't start saying that until 5 days before the session ended. And so we were in a scramble of none of the senators thought that it was actually going to come up to a vote. They weren't taking it seriously. It was clear when we met with a lot of senators in the last few weeks that they hadn't even read the bill. They were asking for things that were in the bill. And it was just very clear at that point that it was going to be a challenge because we didn't have the support of our leadership. So I think we can say, I think the leaders are to blame, but beyond that, there's the folks who were under the leaders that could have taken leadership, right? And that's the 9 senators who blocked the MRTA from even coming to a vote.
Yeah, and let's give a little backstory about these 9 senators and the Independent Democratic Conference, which was supposedly dissolved as of April of last year. And I'm just going to read a little summary of what the IDC is so everybody can get an understanding of what we were dealing with. The Independent Democratic Conference, also known as the IDC, was a group of members of the New York State Senate from the Democratic Party who caucused separately from the Democratic members of the state Senate from January 2011 to April 2018. At the time of its dissolution, the IDC included 8 members: Leader Jeffrey Klein, Senators Marisol Alcantara, Tony Avella, David Carlucci, Jesse Hamilton, Jose Peralta, Diane Savino, and David Valesky. Klein, Savino, Valesky, and Carlucci formed the IDC in 2011 due to disagreements with John Sampson, who at the time was the Democratic leader in the New York State Senate, which would have been synonymous to Andrea Stewart-Cousins. The IDC allied itself with Senate Republicans throughout its existence. During the 2013-2014 legislative session, the IDC and the Senate Republican Conference controlled the Senate jointly, as the Senate Republicans did not have sufficient numbers to form a governing majority on their own. After negotiations with Governor Cuomo, the IDC announced on April 4th, 2018, that it would dissolve. Its members would rejoin the Senate Democratic Conference, and that Klein would become the Deputy Democratic Conference leader. The IDC dissolved on April 16th. In the subsequent September 13th, 2008 Democratic primaries, 6 of the 8 former IDC members were defeated. Only Carlucci and Savino won their respective primary contests. So long story short, this was a rogue Democratic caucus who was siding with the Republicans, right? Mm-hmm. And we saw that come, voting time, that we were lacking Democratic support from 6 senators. For me, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this because all of these senators de-seated Republicans, all ran on progressive platforms, and all were the reasons that the MRTA didn't get passed. Okay? It's frustrating. Mm-hmm. So it almost seems like, although the IDC was dissolved, there was this rogue informal IDC, and that was Shelley Mayer, John
There's 9
Brooks.
of them, right?
There's nine of them, right? I mean, Kevin Thomas, who was a new Democratic seat, literally campaigned on a pro-legalization agenda. There's video interview evidence of him saying we need to legalize. This is going to solve many of our state's problems, and yet they sat on the other side of the line. That to me seems unconstitutional. That to me seems like the people of Long Island were hustled. And to me, that is a lesson in that when we get out to vote, make sure you understand who the people are that you're voting for and what they represent. Because we were 2 votes away from a program that encompassed medical improvements, an adult use recreational legal market, and improvements to the hemp regulations. This bill would have touched the lives of all consumers and non-consumers, and 6 fraudulently Democratic senators, 9 stepped in the way.
Yeah, I think that there is, beyond just being educated about who you're voting for, because these folks ran on platforms that made people think that they were going to vote in favor of legalization, right? They ran it. Kevin Thomas is a perfect example. There's literally video footage of him speaking as though he's in support of the MRTA. And then he was one of the folks who, it's not even that they voted no on it. It's that they weren't giving the Democratic conference the support that it needed to bring this bill to a vote, to have the confidence that it would have passed through. Because some of these senators are now being quoted saying, oh, well, if it would have come to vote, I'm not saying I would have voted no, but you also weren't siding with the 24 plus other senators who had added themselves on as co-sponsors to this bill. And had you also added yourself as a co-sponsor or said that you would have actually voted yes had it come to a vote, then we'd be in a much different place than we are right now. So I think that it is holding them accountable to what they say they're going to do, because 2 years is a long time. People think, these folks got voted into office just last November and they don't have another election until next November. So they're sitting here thinking, oh, people are going to forget. We can't forget. We cannot forget that there are these 9 senators that chose to not caucus with their party and chose to say, I don't think this bill should even come to a vote, or did something to make the leader think that they couldn't have confidence in them that they were going to vote yes. There was a lot of folks making it look like they were negotiating, but then behind the scenes, they were asking for things that they knew they were never going to get. They were just trying to kill the bill. So they were looking for things like taking money from the community reinvestment grant and putting it towards wealthy suburbs. That is not what that money's for. Wealthy suburbs have benefited from the war on drugs. I mean, I don't know if I want to say they've benefited. They're not the ones who've been most harmed. They're not the ones who've been directly targeted and had people at disproportionate rates arrested for doing something that's okay for people in the suburbs to do.
That's like saying, rather than all the money going back to the parts in the inner city of Rochester that need it most, it's going to go to Pittsford. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and I think the city, it is looking at specific areas from the city and looking at those that have been disproportionately impacted, right? It's not, and that's the same kind of thing that was happening with the folks who were trying to get money in other places of the state, where it wasn't from areas that have been disproportionately impacted. And they know that that is something that's not negotiable in terms of what the sponsors are trying to push through.
We were talking last night because I was doing a little digging on campaign contributions of the new Long Island senators, and I found something that was really interesting regarding Shelley Mayer. And if you guys remember earlier on when I was reading that bit about the IDC, some of the names that I had mentioned, coincidentally enough, 5 of the original 8 members of the IDC all gave identical campaign donations to Shelley Mayer. David Carlucci, $11,000. Jeff Klein, $11,000. Marisol Alcantara, $11,000. Diane Savino, $11,000. And Jose Peralta, $11,000. Like, is this an attempt to reform and to rebuild the IDC? I don't know. I think these are things that we have to look deeper into, because regardless of if the IDC was dissolved in April or not, it was still very much present in this current
Yeah, I
legislation
think,
process.
I mean, there's been talks about let's name these 9 the new IDC. Even though they aren't the IDC, right? The IDC dissolved. These are still folks that are caucusing together. It's not even Democrats or Republicans at this point. It's because this is a bipartisan issue, right? Democrat or Republican, we talk to folks all of the time who support this issue. And so that was another frustrating thing during our lobbying is when we were going in and talking to senators who wanted to act like it was still a very partisan issue. So we can't even talk about this as Democrat or Republican because it's the Democrats that did it, right? We talked to Republicans who we felt like would have voted yes had it come to a vote on the floor. Very confidently, we felt like they would have voted yes. But it was the Democrats not willing to work with their own party to do something that the majority of their party wanted to see happen. And that we had polling to show that their constituents, a majority of their constituents, also wanted to see happen. So, yeah. Yeah,
we need to organize, rebuild, and come to next legislative session, we need to hit the road as hard, hit the pavement as hard as we can, because this is far from over, and it was a kick in the stomach for all of us. But mark my words that this will not be the last time that they hear from us.
No, it's not a defeat. It's a delay, right? And it doesn't wait until next legislative session. It starts now. Those folks who are in Long Island now have to be in Long Island until January. And so that means they're in district, and that means they're a lot more accessible than they were when they were in Albany. When we lobbied this all year, we had to make the 3.5, 4-hour trip down to Albany and make the time to do that. Now these folks are in district 5 minutes down the road, and you can meet with them as many times as you can fit into your schedule and as many times as you can get yourself on their schedule. Folks in Long Island, folks in Westchester, in Brooklyn, you are the ones that need to be pounding on the doors of your senators and making them talk to you and educating them on the quote unquote reasons why they didn't say that they would be in favor of the MRTA if it came to vote. And voter education is so extremely important. Know who you're voting for. Know if they're doing what they said they were going to do the last time that you voted for them. So NORML has a really great platform, vote.norml.org, and it helps you educate yourself about your elected officials and about different candidates who are running for different positions. We're going to be updating it over these next couple months to include all this new information about senators. And then beyond that, we have an election this year too. It's important for folks to get out and vote in these small elections that are happening this year. So even though we don't have senators or assembly members who are whose seats are up this year for election, we have really important seats locally that are up for election, like the district attorney, like the county executive, like our different county legislator seats. City council, there are so many important local seats that are up for election this year that us as cannabis consumers, cannabis activists, people that care about the laws that are being made for us, we need to get out and vote, because when the MRTA passes, the folks who are being voted for this year at the local level are the ones who will get to say how it's going to look locally. For example, the person who sits in the county executive seat is the one who gets to ultimately say whether or not we opt out, if that's how it's written into the law. So we need to make sure that we have someone in that seat who's on our side. So vote.norml.org, check back there all the time. We're going to be updating it a lot over the next couple months, and get out and vote tomorrow. Tomorrow is the first election of the year. Get out and vote. There's a Democratic primary. There's a lot of seats where if you live in the city, city council, only Democrats run for city council. So whoever wins the election tomorrow is who actually wins the city council seat. So get out and vote. Polls are open 12 to 9. You can go to the county elections website and find out your polling information on there. And yeah, get out and vote.
It matters. Locals, we obviously can't rely on our state government to push through laws that will benefit us. So it has to happen at home. Mm-hmm. Just last week, the couple days before the MRTA got crushed, we got the district attorney, Sandra Dorley, to stop prosecuting low-level marijuana crimes for up to 2 ounces possession and smoking in public. I'm not sure if that would have been the same outcome had we met with her post death of the MRTA. But this is a huge step in the right direction, and it's up to us at home, members of Rock NORML, constituents, everybody to get involved, because it does matter. And the more pressure that we put on people, the more that we can start building, what would be an ecosystem from the MRTA right back at home. So by the time that it comes up to vote next time, it will be a no-brainer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, getting people in those seats who are going to support us and who are going to take the time to learn about things that they don't maybe know information about. Lost my train of thought. But we should go back to the MRTA dying and what happened in its place.
Yes, the Decrim bill.
Yes. So the MRTA never made it to the Assembly or the Senate for a vote. It just never came to vote, and it died. And so in its place, our leaders felt like they had to do something to appease all of the lobbying and efforts and education that the Start Smart Coalition, which Rock NORML is a part of, has done tirelessly really for the past 6 months. We've hit the ground. But before that, even, this bill has been introduced this is the 5th or 6th session that it's been introduced. So yeah, there was this quote unquote decriminalization bill that was introduced like Monday night, a couple days before the session ended. It was introduced, and essentially what it did is, in the law before this bill was introduced, actually still today, because the bill is still sitting on the governor's desk, it hasn't been signed yet. So what the law says today is marijuana is decriminalized, has been in New York since 1977. But if you have any amount in public sight, so that means if a police officer tells you to empty your pockets and you do, and now your dime is in open sight, that's now a misdemeanor. Whereas if it's in your pocket, it's a violation. And it was also, if you are smoking a joint or, smoking anything in public, that is also a misdemeanor. So even though we've been decriminalized since 1977, those two loopholes, having any amount in public sight and public consumption, have been misdemeanors. So that is how we've seen so many folks be arrested and prosecuted for misdemeanor level offenses for small amounts of marijuana. Overwhelmingly, those have been people of color. And we're talking just marijuana. We're not talking marijuana and a gun. We're not talking marijuana and violence. We're talking just marijuana. We know people across all races consume cannabis at the same rates. So that fact alone, knowing that we've been decriminalized in New York State since 1977, yet over 80% of those arrests have been people of color, is proof in the pudding that decriminalization doesn't work. Right? It does not work. And so what this new decriminalization bill does is it takes away those two loopholes. It says, okay, any amount up to 2 ounces in public sight is a violation. It can no longer be a misdemeanor. And the same thing with public consumption. It's now a violation. It's no longer a misdemeanor. Problem is, it's up to law enforcement's discretion. And we, just like decriminalization since 1977, has been up to law enforcement's discretion. I myself have had interactions with police where I could have been charged with a misdemeanor based on the law, and I wasn't. I wasn't even charged with a UPM, an unlawful possession of marijuana. I was just told, put it away, don't let me see it again.
Why do you think that is?
I can say with confidence because of the color of my skin. People don't want this to be a race issue, but it has been a race issue. And so we can't ignore that. And it's not to say that white people haven't been harmed by the war on drugs. That's not what we're saying at all. But disproportionately, it's been people of color, specifically people of color from low-income communities. And so with decriminalization, or this new decriminalization bill, all it does is takes away those two loopholes. There's still a whole ecosystem of cannabis that's still illegal, right? That's still criminal, that you can still be charged a misdemeanor or a felony for. Whereas if we move to the model of the MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, that whole ecosystem would then have a place to be legal. And so legalizing cannabis, legalizing marijuana doesn't end racism. That's not at all what we're saying is going to happen with the MRTA, because we even see in states after legalization happens, the arrests are still disproportionate, right? In Colorado, there's still a disproportionate amount of arrests for people of color. Racism's always going to exist. But if we take away the tools that law enforcement has to discriminate against certain individuals, then we can make things a little better, right? And I mean, this decriminalization bill is a step in the right direction. I don't want to, because it also does include expungement for people, which is huge.
That's huge.
New York State doesn't currently have expungement. So what New York State has right now for people is sealing of your records. But the problem with sealing your records is they're still available to, like, the courts can still get to them. There's still a whole subset of folks that are still able to have access to records that are sealed. Whereas if a record is expunged, I think it's just the FBI has access to it. I think no one can get to it except for just I'm pretty sure it's just the FBI. So this decriminalization bill did write in expungement for low-level marijuana possession offenses, and it did write it in a way that it's automatic and that it's not left to the victim to have to pay for. But there's still all of these folks who've been impacted that aren't being addressed, right? And there's still places for people to get arrested. The Fourth Amendment says that an arrest is just technically being detained by an officer, right? Not being able to leave and have it be okay. And so with these violations, that's still technically an arrest. And we're still going to see, I mean, I can't predict the future, but if I'm going to try, I would be willing to put money on that law enforcement is still going to use this as a tool and we're going to see disproportionate impacts on people of color.
My guess is that we see the number of total arrests start to decrease. I mean, that would make sense, but my guess is that the ratio of disproportionality will remain constant.
Yeah, certainly.
But also, it's a step in the right direction, but it's clearly not the answer. We have preached over and over that decrim doesn't work, that really the only way to not only combat this disproportionality and a lot of the social injustices that have occurred, but to do that while building a full spectrum, ecosystem of small business and improvements.
Having to be community focused,
Yes.
right? And the business of it's community focused, the reinvesting back into communities. I think that is what's lacking so much with decriminalization is we're not looking at all of those other impacts that this has had on people's lives, right? With not being able to gain access to financial aid for school. It's not to say that the MRTA is going to give people money for financial aid, but what it's going to do is reinvest back into those communities of the folks who didn't have that opportunity. And yeah, it was a disappointment to see how close we were to what really is the gold standard of legislation, because it's not that it's something completely unheard of either to take this tax revenue and do that. There is, I forget which city it is in California, but there's one that has chosen to use the tax revenue in that way.
Oakland?
Oakland. It is Oakland. And just seeing what that can do to communities is New York needs it. Rochester needs it.
I find it so ironic that we got lobbied so hard by the PTA, and there was just an article released by I don't remember who it is, but it was talking about how Colorado just hit another $1 billion in tax revenue. Remember, they're a fifth of the size of us, right? And they're putting a lot of this money into scholastic infrastructure and building schools and all the in education. All the problems that we were, where our oppositions are actually, this is being used as a solution, and even presenting this type of data and saying, listen, your fears are fears and they're not data driven, and here's solutions that are actually working. It still didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for me, a learning this has been such a learning experience for me, because even in the presence when you know what you're doing is right, the data proves it, the stats prove it, the anecdote proves it, and you have an entire state rallying behind you from a constituent perspective and from an organizational perspective through the Start Smart, that things can still go in favor of only a select few of people who have no experience in this industry, and it's disheartening, and it's
it's disheartening and encouraging too, right? Because we have our sponsors, who I just want to give a shout out again to Senator Liz Kruger and Assemblywoman Crystal People-Stokes. Having them in the positions that they're in, and having them be the sponsors of this bill, and really representing what New Yorkers want to see in legalization, and being willing to negotiate, but not being willing to negotiate on the things that are our bottom line. Assemblywoman Crystal People-Stokes, huge shout out to really hearing the importance of home cultivation, and on the consumer side of it and on the small business side of it. And I tell you folks, the Senate wants that out of the MRTA, and we need to continue to lobby to keep it in the MRTA. I'm not saying Senator Liz Kruger wants it out. She's also a huge, strong ally of ours and has been doing everything that she can. But there's senators who want it out of there. So I think that sticking to that bottom line, sticking to the community reinvestment bottom line, sticking to the small business bottom line, that is huge. We know that New Yorkers want to keep New York cannabis, right? We don't want it to be big cannabis coming in and setting up shop. We want our friend who's growing right now to have a chance to make something of their bomb ass weed that they have, if they want to do that. And having the sponsors understand the importance of that and trying to create avenues into the market for folks like that is so important. And we're just really grateful to have Senator Kruger and Assemblywoman Crystal People-Stokes, because as much corruption as there is in Albany, there's people in there too. I did not plan on getting politically involved when I founded NORML. I thought I was just going to educate the community. Yeah, I was in Albany like 3 days in the last week. So that's how that worked out. We have to be politically involved, guys. It sucks sometimes. It's frustrating as all hell, but it's so worth it.
You're going to get lobbied against everything. But you have to get involved, because when you understand the intricacies of this system and how this all works.
And how much our voices truly matter. They really do. I know that it probably sounds like they don't after this bill not passing, but the governor's office hears us. The governor's office knows who NORML is. We know Crystal People-Stokes' office. We know Liz Kruger's office, and they're listening to us. Those are the folks who, even if they aren't able to do what we want to happen, we know they're in our corner fighting for us. And just making those relationships and showing up, and beyond them, showing up to the folks that you put in office. Senator Funky, Senator Robach, Assemblyman Bronson, Assemblywoman Jamie Romeo. Go to their offices and tell them what you think. Some of those folks I just listed are co-sponsors, do support the issue, but still go in and tell them what you think, because there's folks who don't support the issue that are going in and telling them what they think. And I think the scariest thing about hearing the word lobbying is it sounds so intimidating, right? Like, oh, lobbying. No, lobbying is just really going in and educating. It's really just, we are experts on this issue. We know about the benefits of legalization. We also aren't ignorant to the fact that there are some negative things that come along with legalization, and we're able to talk about all of that. And we need to organize and mobilize and keep growing more people that care about this issue and want to go and talk to folks about this issue. And if you listening are one of those people, reach out to NORML. Get involved with us.
It's time to build the army.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that, really it's been about a year and a half since you founded the organization. Up until 6 months ago, we literally didn't even have a bank account, literally no bank account. We now have one. And we were all volunteer, and it's amazing the progress that you can make with virtually no resources, but just with a handful of highly passionate and incredibly educated people. I can't imagine if we were up to bat with the type of resources that our opposition was. And let me tell you that I will go to the depths of the earth to make sure that the next go around we have those types of resources, because
checks made payable to NORML Inc.
Yeah, seriously. So my question is, what's next? What is the next, what's the likelihood of this going into legislative session, and being, becoming legalized and pushed through next year? And what do we do between now and then?
So there's still a chance for this bill to come up to vote in December. We're figuring out the logistics of that. But Senator Kruger, go to the Rock Normal Instagram page and check out a video of Senator Kruger from a couple weeks ago. Talking about how committed to getting this bill passed she is. Senator Kruger is the one who wrote the bill. She sponsored it originally, and then Crystal Peoples-Stokes took that bill and sponsored it in the assembly. So what Senator Kruger said is that they have to go back to Albany in December for something else, and that it's her goal to get this bill up to vote then. So that's goal number one, is in December. We got to figure out how to make that happen, and keep lobbying and educating folks while they're in district. It doesn't stop just because they're out of Albany. Like I said, it gets easier. Contact us if you need help setting up those meetings or have questions about how that goes. You want resources to talk to people. Rock Normal is a resource for you to get more politically involved. We need to be politically involved as cannabis consumers. So that's step one, is get involved, and then we're trying to get it passed through in December. And then if not, we're going to work to get it through the budget next year and hope that happens. And then if not, then we're going to get it through in the legislative session. We're not going away. It's not a defeat. It's just a delay. We're going to get it.
I just look at like Illinois passed, and it's going to go to the governor's desk to sign tomorrow. The governor of Maine just said that when the bill goes to her desk, she's going to sign it. So we're seeing all of these states, Maine especially around us, Vermont's on its way, Jersey's on its way. So as consumers,
Mass is there,
and low key Massachusetts is probably like, yes, they didn't legalize. Because when I was in Massachusetts a month ago, literally walking out of there, I was, I'm an activist, blah blah blah. I'm from New York, and she goes, "Oh, I'll be kind of disappointed when you guys legalize." Oh, why is that? Well, the majority of our revenue comes from New York State. So, the good news as a consumer is that now that we have these decrim measures in place, and coupled with all the other states around us starting to legalize, we're going to have really good access to high quality regulated cannabis. So for that, New York State, we thank you. But as from a business mind and from a medical side and a farmer's perspective, and all these people
and accessibility, New York, come on.
Did they even whatever happened to that medical expansion bill? Did they squash that?
I didn't see it move at all. We do know that the hemp bill passed, so we're going to have some updates on what that's going to mean for everyone, because there are changes to the CBD industry locally in New York. We're still making our way through the hemp bill, because there was a standalone hemp bill, and then there was a standalone medical marijuana bill to expand the existing medical program. Medical bill didn't move. It didn't move. So
the one thing literally the only thing that the medical program had to do, if there was to do one thing, it would be to involve flower, right? Yeah. And they couldn't. That is the one thing that would have made companies like Columbia Care and MedMen, who are seeing declining revenues, increase automatically, right? And they couldn't even get that passed. Were you listening at all? I mean, we know that Governor Cuomo was his campaign contributors were MedMen. They were the largest campaign contributor, consisting of over $110,000. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that Governor Cuomo would have at least said, "Hey, we need to improve the medical program," but nothing got done except some weak ass decrim bills and a hemp bill that we'll elaborate on next week. But that I don't know. That shocks me. And I know there's a lot of pissed off medical patients, because these are the people that need it the most. And these are the people that right now have access to products that aren't what they want. There are no flower. A lot of the products that are selling are not full spectrum, and they're vastly overpriced, and they're ineffective. So it's if we don't have insurance, if we don't have full spectrum medicine, these places are just infrastructures set up for failure. And for me, I don't care if the ROs fail. That doesn't bother me at all. But at least if we're going to have some sort of access in New York State, whether it's adult use or whether it's RO, let's at least do something that the consumers want, that the medical patients want. Because right now you're just setting these places up for failure.
It's putting politics before people, and at the end of the day, the medical folks are the ones who are suffering the most from this. I mean, there's the social justice aspect that's also suffering hugely. At least we did get that decrim measure passed, and I'm grateful that a step was taken for that. I want to be very clear, that was not a win. We are looking at decrim as a loss, because the MRTA would have done decrim times a million. Decrim is it's not even a bronze, it's an effort medal. Participation award.
I got a lot of those as a kid, unfortunately.
It's like my Dare trophy sitting at home. No.
God, I hope you don't still have a Dare trophy.
Oh, I do. My niece plays with it. I have my Dare graduation certificate on the fridge at my parents' house too. But anyways, yeah, the decrim was not a win, right? MRTA would have been a win. But the medical patients are really suffering. Our medical program is so insufficient in New York. And so I think the way that we're going to see the biggest chance that we have of seeing this pass through either at the end of this year or in the budget next year is for people to stay pissed off. Do not let this feeling of anger and what go away. Like, we're mad. You need to stay mad and use your anger to motivate you to get involved with Rock Normal or in some other political way, but get involved in politics. Like I said, it's frustrating, but if you're with Rock Normal, it's also really fun, because what's more fun in politics than talking about weed? Yeah. I can't think of anything else that I would be willing to go to Albany for all the time. At least at this point in my life.
No, not at all, especially when it's cold. No way. And we're pretty damn good at it. We're really, really good.
Yeah,
at
and
this
it's
whole,
fun.
Yeah,
it really
fun.
is. 2 years ago, I didn't know any of this that I know. I have learned so much. So if you are sitting there thinking, well, I don't know how I'd go in and be an expert, you're an expert by wanting to be an expert, and then by taking the steps to learn about it and ask questions and talk to other experts. And when I call myself an expert, by no means am I saying I don't have more to learn. We all always have more to learn. But, locally, you can be an expert. There's not a lot of people that know a lot about this. And so just take the steps to learn. Rock Normal has a great resources page that you can go on and start there. Also on Rock Normal /join, we have a volunteer form that you can fill out if you want to get more involved as a volunteer. That's a good first step in just getting more involved and talking with us.
The number one rule of being a good activist is to educate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to be a damn good activist. This is a very complicated issue. This isn't just being sound, in the endocannabinoid system or in the justice side of farming. You have to understand this issue from a full spectrum perspective, from a bird's eye view, because then you can see how the narrative plays out. Like, there's only really a handful of people. Well, the cannabis community understands why the MRTA should have gotten passed, because it was a full spectrum bill. You can see why having home grow would lead to thriving small businesses, which we can see, through the craft beer industry. And with all that revenue generated, we can see how these community reinvestment coffers would get filled. And lo and behold, we start building infrastructure. We start, pushing a solution and rebuilding the communities that have been disproportionately impacted, rather than just throwing a Band-Aid right now.
Yep.
Decrim is a Band-Aid. The MRTA is a solution.
Yep, definitely.
So before we sign off, let's talk about this medical event that we're hosting in July.
Yes. So I think part of staying pissed off and activated and motivated is being educated, right? And knowing enough to speak to the things that you're pissed off and activated about. And so Rock Normal is really going to focus heavily on doing a lot of educational events over the next 6 months. It's something that we always focus on, but that's going to be our main focus, and getting these talking points out to people. So we have more folks that are out there in support of it and that are able to speak to the people that are opposed to it and maybe change their mind. So we have a medical event coming up on July, I said the date wrong earlier.
I think it was the
27th.
27th or 22nd?
Saturday, July 27th.
Shout out to the intern for correcting that. Nazareth's finest.
So Saturday, July 27th, we are partnering with New York Hemp Lab, and we're putting on an event at UUU Art Collective from 10 to 12:30. We have Dr. Harold Smith, who's the founder of Canometrics.
And he was on episode 2?
Yep. Yes, that Dr. Smith, or that Harold, Dr. Harold, that genius. He's going to be one of the presenters of the event. And then also Flowered Wellness, which is a business based in Buffalo who is focused on educating folks about full spectrum hemp medicine, cannabis is medicine. And they also help people get registered for the medical marijuana program in New York. So 2 really great presenters presenters that we're going to have. Check out rocknormal.org/events to RSVP for that. It is a free event, but there's spaces limited, so you will need to get a ticket for it.
Light refreshments and breakfast is served.
Yep, breakfast and light refreshments will be available. Yeah, it's going to be a really great time.
Yeah, it's
Cannabis is Medicine 101.
Cannabis Medicine 101. I think that, like you said, we have to continue to bring in all these other groups, the medical group, the hemp group, the
law
farmers,
enforcement,
everybody.
PTA. We want to be having these conversations with folks that were pain points during trying to get this bill passed. So be on the lookout for educational events specifically around driving in that conversation, specifically around PTA and what their concerns are. We are really going to be organizing and mobilizing over these next 6 months. So
I'd love to get some law enforcement or PTA members on the podcast. That'd be fun.
And law enforcement always says that they want to talk about this, and we want to invite them to the table to keep talking about it. We've had some law enforcement that's been receptive to talking to us about this, and we want to keep that conversation going and want them to know that this issue is not going away. So be part of the solution. Help us help you.
We can tell them over and over again, and we're going to get there. We think we have to put our torches and pitchforks away for now, and we have to rally. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate the community. We have to come back bigger, faster, stronger next session. It's no longer an if, it's a matter of when we get this passed. So with that, I want to leave you to any final words that you want to say to the community, or onward.
Onward starts now.
Yeah.
Get out there, start learning.
Well, this was our first live show. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We're going to continue to do this. Mary Kruger, Executive Director and founder of Rock Normal, and myself, Steve Vanderwall. Everybody, thanks for joining. We are out.
Out.
Out. Still get high in the parking lot.
Yeah.